heard black people can't swim, or another stereotype that black women don't swim because they don't want to get their hair wet. Silly jokes, but it is no laughing matter. According to the YMCA, black children are at a higher risk of drowning. Black children are 3 times more likely to drown than white children. Segregation and desegregation of pools during the 1920s and 1960s negatively affected the black community. As desegregation moved throughout the nation, it created a rise in private pools and swim clubs in the 60s. When whites abandoned public pools, it resulted in a lack of federal funding, leading to closures. The boom in private pools left many blacks without access to them. The pools that were available were terribly underfunded without swimming instructions, classes, or instructors. The historical series of discrimination, stigma, and blatant racism continue to impact communities of color. During the Jim Crow era, many public swimming areas, such as beaches, were limited to blacks. On May 14, 1959, Gilbert Mason Sr. and several other African Americans conducted wade-ins as a form to protest against segregation at the Biloxi, Mississippi beach. The wade-ins continue for years, leading to multiple arrests and violence from countergroups. The beach remained off limits to blacks until 1968 after a long legal battle. Civil rights movements swarmed in many southern states, including a significant event that will mold the Civil Rights Act of 1964. On June 18th, black and white protesters performed a swim-in in a whites-only pool at the Monson Motor Lounge in St. Augustine, Florida. Lounge owner James Brock dumped acid into the pool in an attempt to force the protesters out. On many occasions, protests would end in arrests made by law enforcement. The map of the fight for integration also pins here in Baltimore City at Drew Hill Park. Pool number 2 served as a recreational and swimming area for blacks. Pool number 1, Drew Hill Park Swimming Pool, was designated for whites only until 1956, according to Graham Projects. Baltimore native and artist Joyce J. Scott was commissioned by the city's Department of Recreations and Parks to create a memorial for Pool number 2 in 1999. And as of 2021, Pool number 1 is currently under renovation. Today, many black children and parents still lack proper swimming skills. According to a recent national study conducted by the YMCA, U.S. Swimming Foundation, and the University of Memphis, quote, 64% of black/African American children cannot swim, end quote. The YMCA shares an excerpt from a list of cultural and historical factors that explain why many blacks are at a higher risk of drowning. Quote, inherited fear of drowning. The USA Swimming Foundation study shows that if a parent does not know how to swim, there is only a 13% chance that their child will learn how to swim. When adult role models fear water or have been negatively impacted by the above experiences, their comfort level with swimming is passed down to younger generations. End quote. An inherited fear of drowning. Could it be our ancestors traveled throughout the Atlantic slave trade that caused generational trauma? The Middle Passage was the beginning of our history as African Americans. The timeline of our journey has been full of hardships, barriers, and triumph. Some break barriers, and for those that are unbroken, pay the ultimate price. Maybe the inherited fear can be associated with the fate many enslaved Africans endured willingly and unwillingly to escape bondage. Historical black trauma never leaves. It stays dormant within ourselves and often in society. As blacks continue to learn about their stories, it is difficult to not correlate our history to our present-day lives and disparities. Blacks and their relationships with large bodies of water have an extremely dark and deep past. The duration of voyages could last for weeks or months, depending on the weather. Life on the slave ships was miserable. During the voyage, many enslaved Africans were housed below deck in tight, barely ventilated quarters. In these quarters, the enslaved were forced to lay in vomit, human excrement, and closely alongside others who were sick. The ships were designed to hold hundreds of slaves and were equipped with barriers to protect ship operators. Along the sides of the ships were nets, used to catch those who chose to drown to death instead of forced servitude. The Zong was a slave ship that departed from Africa in 1781. Operators of slave ships would usually exceed the capacity of human chattel for maximum profit. Overcrowding on ships caused hellish conditions during voyages. Disease ran rampant among slave ships, and captains of those ships ordered a number of slaves to be thrown overboard into the water. These actions were to reduce those who were ill because sick slaves were not insured on ships. However, the lives lost through drowning were granted coverage. The captain of the Zong, Luke Collingwood, was not granted insurance coverage due to mismanagement of the ship. Collingwood, the crew, and owners of the ship faced legal actions against insurers. Although horrendous, the courts agreed to justify the killings of the enslaved and compared their life value to sick livestock. According to a New York Times article posted in 1994, remembrance of slave ancestors lost to the sea noted disputes and estimates of lives lost due to drowning during the Atlantic slave trade. The author interviewed an organizer of the annual tribute to the ancestors of the Middle Passage, Tony Akeem. He placed a range of 100 to 200 million black lives lost. Quote, others say perhaps as many as 14 million people perished. Whichever is true, many historians note that the number of enslaved Africans who died at sea were so great that sharks learned to follow the slave routes because they fed on the bodies thrown overboard. End quote. Swimming is a life skill and a beautiful way to exercise. As a granddaughter of a former firefighter and lifeguard, swimming was a mandatory skill I was taught as a child. Instilling that swimming is a life or death matter in the Black community, especially among the youth, is important. Providing Black children with the confidence/support and physical tools to learn how to swim is necessary. Taking a swim class, or at least familiarizing and obtaining a comfortability while in the water, is an amazing first step to tackle the fear of swimming. And for those who do know how to swim, please encourage your peers and family members to gain proper swimming skills. Engaging in hydrotherapy can also be a small approach for those who don't swim. Let's continue to heal the hurt, pain, stereotypes, trauma, and cycle. Thank you everyone who tuned into this video, and please take the time to observe Black History Month. Do you think there is a correlation of the Middle Passage and the fear of swimming for Blacks? Please comment your thoughts below on this topic. Again, thank you.